In a world where royal protocol dictates every word, every gesture, every breath, one moment of genuine emotion would change everything. Behind the palace walls, away from the cameras and crowds, Catherine, Princess of Wales, held a letter that would bridge two worlds: the ancient traditions of the monarchy and the fierce determination of modern women warriors. The England women's rugby team, known as the Red Roses, had no idea that their upcoming match would become the catalyst for a message that would echo far beyond the rugby pitch, touching hearts across the globe and revealing a side of royalty that few had ever seen. What started as a simple gesture of support would become a defining moment, not just for the team, but for a princess who dared to speak from her heart in a world that demanded she speak from a script. This is the story of how authentic words, delivered at the perfect moment, created ripples that would change lives, challenge expectations, and prove that sometimes the most powerful messages come not from crowns and titles, but from one woman's courage to be genuinely human. The morning mist hung low over Twickenham Stadium as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her office window in Kensington Palace, watching the London skyline slowly emerge from the grey dawn. In her hand, she held a cup of tea that had long since grown cold, her mind elsewhere, focused on a group of extraordinary women who were about to face one of the biggest challenges of their sporting careers. The England women's rugby team, affectionately known as the Red Roses, had captured her attention months earlier when she first attended one of their training sessions. What she witnessed that day had stayed with her: the raw determination, the unbreakable bonds between teammates, and the way they supported each other through both triumph and defeat. These weren't just athletes. They were warriors in every sense of the word. Sarah Mitchell, the team captain, had been playing rugby since she was 8 years old. Growing up in a small Yorkshire village, she had fought for every opportunity to play the sport she loved. The local boys' team had reluctantly allowed her to join when she was 12, mainly because they needed players. What they didn't expect was for this quiet girl with fierce green eyes to become their best player within 6 months. Now, at 27, Sarah stood in the team's changing room at their training facility, looking around at the faces of her teammates. Each woman had her own story of struggle, of proving herself in a world that often dismissed women's rugby as secondary to the men's game. There was Emma Thompson, the fly half from Liverpool, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her rugby equipment as a teenager. Jessica Williams, the prop forward from Wales, who had overcome a career-threatening injury just 2 years earlier. And Maria Santos, the winger who had moved from Portugal with nothing but a dream and a pair of worn rugby boots. The team had been training for months for their upcoming international match against France. It wasn't just any game. It was a match that could determine their ranking for the World Cup, and the pressure was immense. The media attention had been building, with sports commentators questioning whether the team had what it took to compete at the highest level. Meanwhile, Catherine had been following their journey closely, not just as a royal patron, but as someone who genuinely understood the challenges they faced. Her own experiences of stepping into the spotlight, of having every move scrutinized and criticized, had given her a unique perspective on pressure and performance. During a private meeting with her private secretary, James Morrison, Catherine had mentioned her desire to do something meaningful for the team. James, a practical man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, initially suggested the standard approach: a formal letter of good wishes, perhaps a photo opportunity before the match. "With respect, Your Royal Highness," he had said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the official calendar, "we have the established protocols for such occasions." A brief, formal message has always been well received. But Catherine shook her head, her brown eyes showing a determination that James had come to recognize over the years. "These women deserve more than protocol, James. They deserve authenticity." That evening, Catherine returned home to Adelaide Cottage, where her 3 children were already asleep. Prince William was in the study, working on environmental initiative papers, but he looked up when she entered, noting the thoughtful expression on her face. "How was your day?" he asked, setting aside his documents. "I've been thinking about the Red Roses," Catherine said, settling into the chair across from him. They're facing France next week, and I want to send them a message. But not the usual formal letter. William raised an eyebrow, knowing that look in his wife's eyes. What did you have in mind? Something real. Something that acknowledges not just their skill, but their journey. These women have fought for recognition, for equal treatment, for the right to be taken seriously. They've faced criticism and doubt, and they've never given up. As they talked late into the night, Catherine shared stories she had learned about individual team members. She spoke about Sarah's journey from a small village to captaining her country, about Emma's financial struggles, about Jessica's comeback from injury. William listened, understanding why this mattered so much to his wife. The next morning, Catherine canceled several official appointments and asked to visit the team's training facility unannounced. Her security team, led by Chief Protection Officer David Collins, was initially hesitant about the impromptu visit, but Catherine was insistent. Sometimes, she told David as they drove through London traffic, the most important things we do aren't on the official schedule. When they arrived at the training ground, the team was in the middle of an intense practice session. Sarah was calling out plays, her voice carrying across the field as the players executed complex maneuvers. The sound of boots on grass, the sharp calls of encouragement, and the controlled collisions filled the air. Catherine watched from the sideline, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater, trying to remain unnoticed. But gradually, one by one, the players began to realize they had a very special observer. When a coach, David Harris, spotted her, he called for a water break. "Your Royal Highness," he said, jogging over with a mixture of surprise and delight. "We weren't expecting you today." "I hope you don't mind," Catherine replied with a warm smile. "I wanted to see how the preparation was going." Sarah approached, still catching her breath from the intensive drill they had just completed. Up close, Catherine could see the small scar above her left eyebrow, a memento from countless matches, and the calluses on her hands from years of training. "We're honored to have you here, Your Royal Highness," Sarah said. But Catherine held up a hand. "Please call me Catherine today. I'm here as someone who admires what you're all doing, not because of any title." For the next hour, Catherine moved among the players, learning about their individual preparations, their hopes, and their concerns about the upcoming match. She listened to Emma talk about the tactical changes they've been working on, watched Jessica demonstrate a new scrum technique, and heard Maria describe her journey from Lisbon to representing England. What struck Catherine most was their humility combined with their fierce determination. These women had achieved incredible things, broken barriers, and inspired countless young girls to pick up a rugby ball. Yet they spoke about their accomplishments matter-of-factly, always deflecting praise to their teammates. During a quiet moment, Sarah walked with Catherine toward the changing rooms. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said hesitantly. "Of course. Do you ever feel like you're representing more than yourself? Like every mistake you make reflects on everyone else like you?" Catherine stopped walking and looked directly at Sarah. In that moment, the princess and the rugby captain were just two women sharing an understanding that transcended their different worlds. "Every single day," Catherine replied honestly. "The weight of representation is something I think about constantly. But I've learned that the only way to honor that responsibility is to be genuinely yourself, to bring your authentic self to everything you do." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's exactly how we feel about this match. We're not just playing for ourselves, or even for our team. We're playing for every girl who's been told she's too small, too weak, or that her sport doesn't matter." As Catherine prepared to leave, she knew that a standard formal letter would never capture what these women meant to her or what they represented to the country. She needed to find a way to speak to them heart to heart, to acknowledge their struggles and celebrate their strength in a way that went beyond royal protocol. That evening, she sat in her private study at Kensington Palace, a blank piece of paper in front of her. The formal letterhead lay unused to one side as she picked up a simple pen and began to write from her heart. Outside, London continued its endless rhythm, but inside the palace, a princess was crafting words that would bridge the gap between tradition and progress, between duty and authenticity. The message she was about to create would do more than wish a rugby team good luck. It would validate their struggles, celebrate their achievements, and remind them that their fight for recognition and respect was seen and valued by someone who understood the unique pressures of representing something larger than oneself. As the hours passed and the words flowed, Catherine realized she wasn't just writing to the Red Roses. She was writing to every woman who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or asked to prove herself again and again. She was using her platform not just to support a sports team, but to amplify a message about resilience, determination, and the power of never giving up on your dreams, no matter who doubts you. The letter was becoming something unprecedented in royal communications, deeply personal, emotionally honest, and unapologetically supportive of women who dared to challenge expectations. Little did Catherine know that her words would soon travel far beyond the rugby pitch, touching lives and inspiring conversations about women's sports, royal authenticity, and the power of genuine support from unexpected places. The words came to Catherine in waves that night, each sentence building upon the last, as she found herself pouring years of observation and understanding onto paper. The formal study at Kensington Palace, usually reserved for official correspondence, had become an intimate space where royal protocol gave way to human connection. She wrote about the early morning training sessions she had witnessed, where the Red Roses arrived before dawn to perfect their skills while the rest of the world slept. She wrote about the sacrifices she had learned about, the players who worked multiple jobs to support their rugby careers, who nursed injuries in silence, who faced criticism from those who questioned whether women's rugby deserved the same respect as men's. By midnight, Catherine had filled several pages with her thoughts, but something still felt incomplete. She wanted her message to be more than supportive words. She wanted it to be a catalyst for change, a statement that would resonate beyond the immediate recipients. The next morning brought unexpected news that would shape the final form of her message. James Morrison entered her office with a tablet displaying various sports headlines, his expression more serious than usual. "Your Royal Highness, there have been some concerning developments regarding media coverage of the team," he said, setting the device on her desk. Catherine read through the articles with growing frustration. Several prominent sports commentators had published pieces questioning the investment in women's rugby, suggesting that the upcoming match against France was merely a warm-up act for more important men's games. One particularly dismissive article referred to the Red Roses as well-meaning amateurs and questioned whether they possessed the tactical sophistication needed for international competition. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Catherine said quietly, her voice carrying a steel edge that James had rarely heard. "These women have proven themselves time and again, and yet they're still fighting for basic recognition." Meanwhile, across London at the team hotel, Sarah Mitchell was conducting her own battle with negative press coverage. She had made the difficult decision to shield her younger teammates from the worst of the criticism, but the veteran players were well aware of the narrative being spun about their upcoming match. Emma Thompson sat in the hotel lobby with her laptop, scrolling through social media posts about the team. As the most social media-savvy member of the squad, she had taken on the unofficial role of monitoring public sentiment, but today's task felt particularly challenging. "Look at this," she said to Jessica Williams, who had joined her for breakfast. "Someone's calculated that the attendance for our match will be less than half what it was for the men's team last month, and they're using that as evidence that nobody cares about women's rugby." Jessica, at 32, one of the oldest members of the team, had seen this pattern many times before. "Remember when I started playing 15 years ago? We couldn't even get local newspapers to report our scores. The fact that people are writing articles about us at all, even critical ones, shows we've made progress. But it's frustrating," Emma continued. "We train just as hard. We study game footage until our eyes burn. We've dedicated our lives to this sport. Why is our commitment always questioned?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Maria Santos, who had been out for an early morning run. As the newest member of the team, having only earned her England cap 2 years earlier, Maria brought a different perspective shaped by her experience as an immigrant athlete. In Portugal, Maria said, settling into a chair with her post-workout smoothie, women's rugby barely exists. When I moved here and saw what the Red Roses had built, it was like discovering a whole new world. Yes, there's still criticism, but look what you've created: professional contracts, international recognition, young girls wearing your jerseys. That didn't happen by accident. Their discussion was overheard by David Harris, the head coach, who had been reviewing tactical notes at a nearby table. At 48, David had spent his entire adult life in rugby, first as a player and then as a coach. His decision to move from men's rugby to women's rugby 5 years earlier had surprised many in the sport, but he had never regretted it. The difference, David said, joining their conversation, is that the men's game has had over a century to build its foundation. What you've accomplished in a fraction of that time is remarkable. But I know that doesn't make the criticism any easier to hear. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine had made a decision that would transform her message from a private letter into something far more significant. She called in her communications team, led by director Sarah Williams, not to be confused with a rugby player, to discuss an unprecedented approach. "I want to record a video message," Catherine announced as the team gathered in her office. Something personal, direct, and unscripted. The communications team exchanged glances. Video messages from members of the royal family were typically highly produced affairs, with every word carefully crafted and reviewed by multiple departments. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah Williams said carefully, "we could certainly arrange a video production. Would you like us to prepare talking points?" "No," Catherine replied firmly. "I want to speak from my heart directly to these women. I've written down my thoughts, but I want them to see that this comes from a genuine place." The decision created a flurry of activity behind palace walls. Technical teams were consulted, legal departments reviewed protocols, and security considered the implications of a more personal royal communication. But Catherine remained resolute in her vision. That afternoon, she visited the Red Roses training facility again, this time with a small video crew. The players were surprised to see her return so soon, but the warmth of their welcome confirmed what Catherine already knew. These women had embraced her not as a distant royal patron, but as someone who genuinely understood and supported their journey. "I'd like to record something for you," Catherine explained to the assembled team. "Not as Princess of Wales, but as someone who believes deeply in what you represent." The setting they chose was deliberately informal. Catherine seated on a simple bench beside the training pitch, with the sounds of London traffic faintly audible in the background. She wore a casual navy sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back simply. The production crew kept equipment to a minimum, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt more like a conversation between friends than a formal royal address. When the cameras began rolling, Catherine looked directly into the lens, but in her mind, she was speaking to each member of the Red Roses individually. She thought about Sarah's quiet determination, Emma's infectious enthusiasm, Jessica's resilient comeback, Maria's courageous journey, and all the others who had shared their stories with her. "I've been thinking about courage," she began, her voice steady but warm. "Not the kind of courage that makes headlines or wins medals, but the everyday courage it takes to pursue something you believe in when others question its value." As she spoke, the words flowed naturally, building on the letter she had written, but enhanced by the intimacy of direct communication. She talked about the early mornings, the sacrifices, the criticism faced and overcome. She spoke about representation and responsibility, about playing for something larger than personal achievement. "You carry the hopes and dreams of young girls who see in you proof that they too can chase their ambitions without apology," Catherine continued. "But more than that, you've shown an entire nation what it means to commit fully to excellence, regardless of whether that excellence is always recognized or rewarded." The video crew, all seasoned professionals who had worked on countless royal productions, found themselves genuinely moved by what they were witnessing. This wasn't the carefully constructed messaging they were accustomed to. This was authentic emotion and genuine admiration flowing from someone who clearly understood the deeper significance of what she was discussing. As Catherine concluded her message, she addressed the upcoming match against France, but not in terms of wins or losses. Instead, she spoke about the opportunity to demonstrate the values that the Red Roses embodied: teamwork, resilience, and the courage to compete at the highest level while carrying the weight of representation with grace and strength. When the recording finished, the silence stretched for several moments before the team erupted in applause. Sarah Mitchell, usually composed and controlled, wiped away tears that had formed during Catherine's address. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, "for seeing us, for understanding what this means." The video editing process that followed was unlike anything the Palace Communications team had handled before. Rather than the usual multiple drafts and extensive review process, Catherine requested minimal editing, wanting to preserve the authentic feeling of the recording. Within 24 hours, the video was ready for distribution. But before it could be shared with the wider world, Catherine insisted on a private viewing for the Red Roses team. She wanted them to see it first, to approve of how their story had been told, and to understand the impact she hoped it would have. The team gathered in their hotel conference room the evening before their match against France. As Catherine's voice filled the room, sharing her message of support and understanding, something shifted in the atmosphere. The weight of criticism and doubt that had been building seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. When the video ended, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, conversations began, not about tactics or pressure, but about the responsibility and privilege of representing something meaningful, about the young girls who would be watching, about the foundation they were building for future generations of women's rugby. That night, as the team prepared for sleep before their crucial match, each player carried with them not just the technical preparations and strategic knowledge they had developed over months of training, but something more powerful: the knowledge that their efforts were seen, understood, and valued by someone whose own life had been shaped by the weight of representation, and the courage required to meet that challenge with authenticity and grace. Match day arrived with the crisp clarity that only a London spring morning could deliver. At Twickenham Stadium, the cathedral of rugby, groundskeepers made final preparations as the early morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured pitch. By noon, the stands would be filled with spectators, but for now, the venue maintained the quiet dignity of a space awaiting the drama it was about to host. Catherine's video message had been released to the public 12 hours earlier, and the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about the unprecedented personal tone of royal communication. But, more importantly, conversations about women's rugby reached corners of the internet and society that had never engaged with the sport before. At the team hotel, Sarah Mitchell woke before her alarm, as she had done before every important match for the past decade. The captain's room was sparse, but organized, her match day rituals laid out with military precision. Her lucky socks, worn for every international match since 2018, sat folded beside her kit. Her notebook, filled with tactical observations and motivational quotes, lay open to a page where she had transcribed Catherine's words from the video. "You carry the hopes and dreams of young girls who see in you proof that they too can chase their ambitions without apology." 3 floors below, in the hotel restaurant, Emma Thompson was reviewing game footage on her tablet while mechanically eating breakfast. As the team's fly half, she carried the responsibility of on-field decision-making, and her preparation was meticulous. But today, she found her mind wandering to the messages that had flooded her social media accounts overnight. Young girls from across the UK had posted photos of themselves in Red Roses jerseys, many holding signs with quotes from Catherine's video message. One photo particularly struck Emma, a 9-year-old from Manchester holding a handmade poster reading "Everyday Courage," a phrase Catherine had used to describe the team's commitment to excellence despite facing constant skepticism. "Look at this," Emma said to Jessica Williams, who had joined her for the pre-match meal. She showed her teammate the stream of supportive messages, many from people who admitted they had never watched women's rugby before, but were planning to watch today's match because of the princess's words. Jessica scrolled through the post with a mixture of amazement and pressure. "It's incredible," she said slowly, "but it also means we're not just playing France today. We're playing for all of these people who are watching us for the first time." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their head coach, David Harris, whose own morning had been spent fielding calls from journalists wanting to discuss the impact of the royal video message. David had coached at various levels for over 2 decades, but he had never experienced anything quite like the media attention surrounding today's match. "The journalists are asking if the princess's support has added pressure," David said, settling into a chair with his coffee. "What do you think?" Sarah had joined them, her game day composure already settling over her like familiar armor. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "it's clarified what we're playing for. We've always known that we represent more than ourselves, but having someone understand and articulate that so powerfully, it's liberating rather than pressuring." Meanwhile, across London, Catherine was dealing with the unexpected consequences of her decision to speak so personally about the Red Roses. Her private secretary, James Morrison, had arrived at Kensington Palace with a folder full of interview requests from international media outlets, invitations to speak at women's sports events, and messages from other royal family members. "The response has been extraordinary," James reported, his initial skepticism about the unconventional approach clearly transformed. "The video has been viewed over 2 million times in less than 12 hours, and the engagement metrics are unlike anything we've seen for royal communications." But Catherine's focus remained on the immediate impact rather than the broader implications. "What about the team? How are they handling the attention?" "For what I understand, they're grateful but focused," James replied. Their coach mentioned that ticket sales for today's match increased by 30% overnight, with many first-time attendees. As the afternoon approached, both Catherine and the Red Roses prepared for what would become a defining moment in women's rugby. Catherine had chosen to attend the match in person, a decision that required significant security coordination, but one she felt was essential given the message she had sent. At Twickenham, the atmosphere was unlike anything the Red Roses had experienced for a women's international match. The stands filled steadily with a crowd that was noticeably different from their usual supporters, families with young daughters, groups of women who had never attended a rugby match before, and longtime rugby fans who had been inspired to support women's rugby by the royal video message. In the England changing room, the pre-match routine proceeded with familiar rituals, but there was an energy that veteran players like Jessica recognized as special. Maria Santos, usually quiet before matches, was sharing stories with her younger teammates about the messages she had received from girls in Portugal who had watched Catherine's video with Portuguese subtitles. "My old coach from Lisbon sent me a message," Maria said, her accent softening with emotion. She said that for the first time, parents in Portugal are asking about rugby programs for their daughters. The French team, meanwhile, had their own preparations to consider. Led by Captain Aurélie Dubois, Les Blues were a formidable opponent with their own rich rugby heritage. But even the French players had noticed the unusual atmosphere surrounding the match, the heightened media attention, and the larger-than-expected crowd. As kickoff approached, Catherine made her way to the royal box at Twickenham, but her presence was felt throughout the stadium. When she appeared on the giant screens, acknowledging the crowd's applause, the cheers carried an extra resonance. Appreciation not just for her attendance, but for her willingness to use her platform to elevate women's rugby. The anthems were sung with particular intensity. The England players visibly moved as they looked into the stands and saw the diverse crowd that had gathered to support them. Sarah Mitchell, standing at the front of the line with her arm around Emma Thompson's shoulders, felt the weight and privilege of representation more acutely than ever before. When the whistle blew to start the match, what followed was rugby of the highest caliber. France struck first with a beautifully constructed try that showcased their renowned flair and skill. The England response was immediate and powerful. Emma Thompson orchestrating an attacking move that culminated in a thunderous try from wing Maria Santos. From the royal box, Catherine watched with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what each moment meant to the players on the field. When England scored, her celebration was genuine and unrestrained, her enthusiasm captured by television cameras and broadcast around the world. The match ebbed and flowed with the drama that only international rugby could provide. Jessica Williams, playing what would later be recognized as one of the finest games of her career, anchored the England scrum with determination that seemed to embody everything Catherine had spoken about in her video message. Each player seemed to be drawing on reserves of strength and focus that went beyond their considerable technical abilities. As the second half progressed, the quality of rugby being played was undeniable. Complex tactical moves were executed with precision, individual brilliance combined with seamless teamwork, and the physical intensity matched anything seen in the professional game. In the stands, first-time attendees found themselves swept up in the drama, understanding viscerally why these women had dedicated their lives to this demanding sport. With 15 minutes remaining and the score tied, Emma Thompson found herself in possession of the ball 30 meters from the French try line. Time seemed to slow as she assessed her options, the weight of representation and the noise of the crowd fading in a background as her training and instincts took over. What happened next would be analyzed and celebrated for years to come. Emma broke through the French defensive line with a combination of skill, power, and determination that exemplified everything the Red Roses represented. As she crossed the try line, the stadium erupted with a volume and emotion rarely heard at women's rugby matches. In the royal box, Catherine was on her feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that spoke to her genuine investment in the outcome. The image of the Princess of Wales celebrating England's try would become iconic, shared millions of times on social media, and used to illustrate the growing support for women's rugby. But the match was far from over. France responded with the intensity and skill that had made them one of the world's premier rugby nations. The final 10 minutes became a testament to the athletic and mental toughness of both teams, each player pushing beyond their perceived limits in pursuit of victory. When the final whistle blew, England had won by a margin that reflected their superior preparation and execution, but France had earned respect for their spirited performance. As the players embraced on the field, the crowd's applause continued for several minutes, recognition of having witnessed something special. In the post-match interviews, Sarah Mitchell was asked about the impact of the royal video message on the team's performance. Her response would be quoted extensively in the following days. The princess understood something that we sometimes forget in the pressure of competition, that we're not just playing rugby, we're proving that women's sport deserves the same respect and support as men's. That understanding gave us strength. As Catherine made her way down to congratulate the team personally, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that her decision to speak authentically had contributed to something meaningful. But she also understood that this moment was just the beginning, that the real impact of her message would be measured not in match results or media coverage, but in the young girls who would take up rugby because they had seen their dreams validated by someone they looked up to. The changing rooms at Twickenham buzzed with the particular energy that follows a hard-fought victory. Steam rose from the showers as players began the process of transitioning from the intense focus of competition back to the normal world. But today felt different from other post-match celebrations. There was a sense that something significant had shifted, not just in the outcome of one game, but in the broader landscape of women's rugby. Sarah Mitchell sat in front of her locker, still in her mud-stained jersey, reading through the stream of messages that had arrived on her phone during the match. Tweets from professional athletes across various sports, messages from rugby clubs around the world, and hundreds of notes from young girls who had watched their first rugby match today, all inspired by Catherine's video message. One message particularly caught her attention, from a rugby coach in rural Wales. Our girls' team has had 6 new players sign up since this morning. They all mentioned the princess's video and wanted to show the same courage she talked about. Emma Thompson, who had orchestrated England's victory with tactical brilliance and leadership, was experiencing her own revelation about the day's broader significance. As the team's most active social media user, she had been monitoring the online response throughout the day, and the numbers were staggering. "Look at this," Emma called out to her teammates, holding up her phone. The hashtag Everyday Courage is trending globally. There are posts from women's teams in Japan, Australia, Canada, everywhere. Catherine's message has gone way beyond rugby. The door to the changing room opened, and their coach David Harris entered, his usual post-match tactical analysis replaced by something approaching wonder. "Ladies," he announced, "I've been coaching rugby for 23 years, and I've never experienced anything like what just happened out there. Not just your performance, which was exceptional, but the atmosphere, the crowd, the sense that we were part of something historic." As the players began to change out of their kit, conversations naturally turned to the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. Jessica Williams, the veteran prop who had seen the women's game evolve dramatically over her 15-year career, reflected on the transformation she had witnessed. "When I started playing," Jessica said, pulling on her casual clothes, "we were grateful for any recognition at all. Today, we had the Princess of Wales speaking about our courage and determination to a global audience. More importantly, she understood what our struggles have been about." Meanwhile, in the stadium's executive area, Catherine was meeting with officials from the Rugby Football Union, discussing the day's success and its implications for the future of women's rugby. The attendance figures spoke for themselves. Today's match had drawn the largest crowd for a women's international in England, with thousands of first-time attendees. "Your Royal Highness," said Margaret Foster, the RFU's Director of Women's Rugby, "the impact of your message has exceeded our most optimistic projections. We've received inquiries about women's rugby programs from regions that have never shown interest before." But Catherine's focus remained on the human element rather than the statistics. "What matters most," she said, "is that these women know their dedication is valued, and that girls watching today understand they can pursue excellence in any field they choose." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Red Roses players, freshly showered and changed, but still carrying the glow of victory and the deeper satisfaction of having played their part in a cultural moment. When Sarah Mitchell entered the room, Catherine immediately approached her with a warmth that transcended royal protocol. "That was extraordinary," Catherine said, embracing the captain. "Not just the rugby, though that was brilliant, but the way you carried yourselves, the way you embodied everything I hope to capture in my message." Sarah, usually articulate and composed, found herself struggling for words. "Your Royal Highness, Catherine, what you did for us, the way you saw us, it changed everything. Not just for today, but for how we see ourselves." As the informal reception continued, individual players shared their experiences with Catherine. Maria Santos talked about the messages she had received from Portugal, where women's rugby was virtually unknown until today. Emma Thompson described the tactical adjustments they had made during the match, while Jessica Williams spoke about the younger players and how the princess's message had given them confidence to express their abilities fully. But perhaps the most moving conversation was with Lucy Barnes, the youngest member of the squad at just 19 years old. Lucy had grown up in a small town in Somerset, where her rugby talent had been nurtured by coaches who believed in her potential despite the limited opportunities for women's rugby development. "I watch your video every morning now," Lucy told Catherine quietly. "The part where you talk about pursuing something you believe in when others question its value. That's been my whole life. Today felt like validation for every time someone told me I was wasting my time." As the official celebrations wound down and the team prepared to return to their hotel, Catherine made an unexpected decision. Rather than returning immediately to Kensington Palace, she asked to join the team's private celebration dinner. Her security detail quickly coordinated the change in plans, understanding that their principal was acting on instincts that had proven wise throughout her years of public service. The restaurant chosen for the team dinner was a modest Italian place in Covent Garden, far from the grand venues typically associated with royal engagements. When Catherine arrived, dressed casually and without fanfare, the atmosphere was warm and intimate, more like a family gathering than a formal royal function. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between rugby analysis, personal stories, and broader discussions about women's sports and social change. Catherine found herself learning as much as she was sharing, gaining insights into the daily realities of being a professional female athlete in a world still adjusting to women's sporting excellence. The evening's most significant moment came when David Harris, the head coach, stood to address the table. "I want to say something about today," he began, his voice carrying the emotion of someone who had dedicated his life to rugby. "What we achieved wasn't just a victory over France, though that was important. We proved that women's rugby belongs on the biggest stages, and we did it with the support of someone who understood exactly what we were fighting for." He turned to Catherine. "Your Royal Highness, your message wasn't just supportive words. It was recognition that our struggles for equality and respect are valid, that our dedication deserves the same acknowledgement as any athlete's. You gave us something we've been seeking for years, authentic validation from someone whose voice carries weight." The applause that followed was heartfelt and sustained, but Catherine's response surprised everyone present. Rather than offering formal thanks, she spoke with the same authenticity that had characterized her video message. "The truth is," Catherine said, standing to address the team, "you've given me something equally valuable. You've shown me what it means to pursue excellence with dignity, to represent something larger than yourself with grace, and to never give up on your dreams despite facing skepticism and doubt. These are lessons I need in my own role, and I'm grateful to learn from your example." As the evening progressed, plans began to emerge for leveraging the day's success into lasting change. The RFU representatives discussed expanding grassroots programs for girls' rugby. Television executives talked about increasing coverage of women's international matches. Sponsors who had previously shown little interest in women's rugby were suddenly eager to associate their brands with the sport. But perhaps the most important development was the quiet conversation between Sarah Mitchell and Catherine about using their platforms to continue advocating for women's sports beyond rugby. They discussed the possibility of Catherine becoming more actively involved in promoting female athletic participation, not just through ceremonial appearances, but through meaningful engagement with athletes and their challenges. "The message you sent today," Sarah said, "it can't be a one-time thing. There are women's teams in every sport who need that same recognition, that same validation of their struggles and achievements." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. Today was a beginning, not an end. If my voice can help create opportunities for female athletes, then I have a responsibility to use it." As the dinner concluded and the team prepared to return to their hotel, the sense of achievement extended far beyond the rugby pitch. They had not only won an important match, but had participated in a cultural moment that would be remembered as a turning point for women's sports in the UK. The media coverage that followed would focus extensively on the unprecedented nature of Catherine's video message and its immediate impact on attendance and public interest. But for the women who had experienced the day firsthand, the significance went much deeper. They had felt truly seen and understood by someone whose platform could amplify their message to corners of society they could never reach on their own. That night, as news of the day's events spread across social media and traditional news outlets, young girls across the UK and around the world went to sleep with new dreams. Some imagined themselves running onto the pitch at Twickenham. Others pictured themselves breaking barriers in different sports or fields entirely. But all of them had heard the same message, that pursuing excellence requires everyday courage, and that their dreams deserve recognition and support regardless of what others might say. The Red Roses had won more than a rugby match. They had helped catalyze a conversation about women's sports that would continue long after the final whistle, supported by a royal voice that had chosen authenticity over protocol and substance over ceremony. 6 months after the match that changed everything, Catherine stood in the same office at Kensington Palace where she had first drafted her message to the Red Roses. But the view from her window now looked out onto a fundamentally different landscape for women's sports in Britain and beyond. The folder on her desk contained a report that would have seemed impossible before that spring day at Twickenham. Girls' rugby participation had increased by 340% across England, with waiting lists at clubs that had previously struggled to field teams. University women's rugby programs had expanded from 15 to 47 institutions. Most remarkably, television viewership for women's rugby matches now regularly exceeded 1 million viewers, making it commercially viable in ways that had seemed impossible just months earlier. But numbers, Catherine had learned, told only part of the story. The real transformation was evident in the messages that arrived daily at Kensington Palace from girls and women who had found their own voices through the courage to pursue their dreams, inspired by a princess who had chosen to speak authentically about women's struggles for recognition and respect. Sarah Mitchell, now captain of a Red Roses team that had achieved the #1 world ranking, had become a regular correspondent with Catherine. Their relationship had evolved from royal patron and team captain to collaborators in a broader mission to support women's athletic participation. Sarah's latest letter lay open on Catherine's desk, describing the team's upcoming tour of schools and underserved communities, a program that had emerged directly from their post-match dinner conversation. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah had written, "yesterday we visited a school in Manchester where the PE teacher told us that before your video message, only 3 girls participated in rugby. Today, they have enough players for 2 teams and are hosting their first inter-school girls rugby tournament next month." The headmaster said it's the first time in the school's history that girls have asked for additional sports funding. The ripple effects had extended far beyond rugby. Catherine's approach to supporting the Red Roses had inspired other members of the royal family to engage more authentically with their patronages. Prince William had recorded an unscripted video message supporting mental health initiatives among young men. Princess and had spoken candidly about the challenges facing equestrian sports. Even King Charles had adopted a more personal tone in his communications about environmental conservation. The transformation was perhaps most evident in Catherine's own schedule, where royal engagements had once been carefully scripted affairs with predetermined outcomes. Her calendar now included regular unannounced visits to women's sports clubs, informal conversations with female athletes, and participation in grassroots sports development programs. On this particular morning, Catherine was preparing for what had become a monthly tradition: breakfast with representatives from various women's sports organizations. The meeting had grown from a simple follow-up to her Red Roses message into a coordinated effort to address systemic barriers facing female athletes across all disciplines. Emma Thompson, now retired from international rugby and working as a development coach, had become one of the most vocal advocates for the changes set in motion by Catherine's video message. She arrived at Kensington Palace that morning with representatives from women's football, cricket, swimming, and athletics, each carrying stories of transformation within their respective sports. "The financial picture has completely changed," reported Helen Davies, Director of Development for Women's Cricket. "Corporate sponsors who never returned our calls before are now competing to associate with women's sports." The authenticity of your message created a cultural shift that made supporting women's athletes not just socially responsible, but commercially attractive. But the conversation that morning focused on challenges that remained. Despite the progress, significant disparities persisted in media coverage, prize money, and development opportunities. The women around Catherine's breakfast table represented sports that were still fighting for recognition, still working to convince skeptics that female athletic excellence deserved equal treatment and respect. Jessica Williams had joined the meeting via video call from Cardiff, where she was establishing a foundation for women recovering from sports injuries. Her rehabilitation center had become a model for supporting female athletes through career transitions, addressing both physical and emotional challenges that had previously been overlooked by the predominantly male sports medicine establishment. "The difference," Jessica said from the screen, "is that we now have a platform to discuss these issues openly. Before, we were expected to be grateful for any attention at all. Now we can advocate for ourselves with the confidence that our voices will be heard and taken seriously." The meeting was interrupted by Catherine's private secretary, James Morrison, who entered with news that would shape the next chapter of the story that had begun with a video message to a rugby team. "Your Royal Highness," James announced, "I've received a call from the International Olympic Committee. They're requesting your participation in a global initiative to promote women's sports participation ahead of the next Olympic Games. They specifically mentioned the impact of your Red Roses message as inspiration for the program." Catherine listened to the details with the same focused attention she had given to the original decision to support the rugby team. The IOC proposal involved creating a series of authentic, personal messages from influential figures to female athletes around the world, acknowledging their struggles and celebrating their achievements in ways that went beyond traditional sports diplomacy. It would mean working with athletes from dozens of countries, James continued, many of whom face cultural and economic barriers that make the challenges faced by British women seem minor by comparison. Around the breakfast table, the women's sports representatives exchanged glances. They understood immediately that this was an opportunity to expand the impact of Catherine's approach far beyond the UK, to reach girls and women in societies where female athletic participation faced even more significant obstacles. Maria Santos, who had remained involved with the Red Roses program while also working to develop women's rugby in Portugal, spoke about the international potential of Catherine's messaging approach. "In many countries," Maria said, "girls are told that sports are not for them, that physical strength and competitive spirit are masculine qualities. Having someone with your global platform speak about the courage required to pursue athletic excellence could literally change lives." The conversation that followed mapped out a vision that extended far beyond sports. They discussed how authentic support for women's athletics could address broader issues of gender equality, self-confidence, and the right of girls everywhere to pursue their dreams without apology or compromise. Catherine found herself thinking about the 9-year-old girl from Manchester whose photo Emma had shown her months earlier, the one holding a sign reading "Everyday Courage." That child had become a symbol for Catherine of the potential impact of choosing authenticity over protocol, of using her platform to address real challenges rather than simply offering ceremonial support. Later that afternoon, Catherine received a call that brought the story full circle. Lucy Barnes, the youngest member of the Red Roses team during their historic match, was calling to share news that she had been selected for a rugby scholarship at Oxford University, the first such scholarship awarded specifically for women's rugby. "I need to tell you something," Lucy said, her voice carrying the same determination that had impressed Catherine on the rugby pitch. "When I applied for this scholarship, they asked me to write about a moment that changed my perspective on sport and life. I wrote about your video message, about what it meant to have someone understand what we were fighting for." As Catherine listened to Lucy's story, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple decision to speak authentically to a group of dedicated athletes. What had started as support for one rugby team had evolved into a movement that was changing how society viewed women's sports and, more broadly, women's right to pursue excellence in any field they chose. The impact was measurable in participation numbers, media coverage, and commercial support. But it was also evident in the confidence of young girls who now believed their athletic dreams were valid, in the coaches who saw their women's programs receive the resources they deserved, and in the athletes who no longer had to apologize for their ambitions or accept lesser treatment simply because of their gender. That evening, as Catherine prepared for dinner with her family, she received one final message that encapsulated the broader significance of the Red Roses story. It came from a teacher in rural Bangladesh who had watched Catherine's video message with English subtitles and had been inspired to start her country's first girls' rugby program. "Your Royal Highness," the message read, "you spoke about everyday courage, about pursuing dreams when others question their value. Today, 12 girls from my village learned to play rugby for the first time. They may never play at Twickenham, but they have learned that their strength and determination matter, that their dreams deserve respect. Thank you for showing us that supporting women's sports is about supporting women's right to be strong, competitive, and excellent." As Catherine read these words, she understood that the story that had begun with a letter to the Red Roses had become something much larger, a testament to the power of authentic communication, the importance of using platforms responsibly, and the potential for one moment of genuine support to create ripples that travel far beyond their original destination. The Red Roses continued to excel on the international stage, their success now part of a broader transformation in women's sports. But their greatest victory remained that spring day at Twickenham when they played not just for themselves, but for every girl who needed to hear that her dreams mattered, her courage was recognized, and her pursuit of excellence deserved celebration rather than skepticism. Catherine's message to the Red Roses had become a message to women everywhere. That everyday courage creates extraordinary change, and that sometimes the most powerful words are those spoken from the heart by someone who truly understands the weight of representation and the privilege of using one's voice to lift others up. In a world of careful protocols and measured statements, authenticity had proven to be the most revolutionary act of all.